I was recently given access to the alpha for a game called Soulframe. You may have heard of it. It's from the creators of Warframe. And in hopping into this alpha, I started thinking a lot about early access and how it has affected my gameplay experiences, how it can help developers or harm developers, the different forms of early access, right? There's the free open beta, there's the try it out weekend, there's like these closed time period early access things, and then there's the full on buy the game, you own it now, and eventually it will come all the way out, right? There's all of these different ways to do it, and then you can have little closed tests with just your own community. There are so many different ways to get feedback from the player base before the game is fully released. And at the same time, there's been some degree of conversation around the idea that early access might be bad, right? There's some level of argument between people of I don't like early access. I do like early access. Early access can be kind of scammy sometimes, which is true. That can happen. And sometimes it kind of spoils the game for you, right? There are all these different angles on it, and I just want to explore this, and I want to look at it not just from the perspective of being a developer and going, oh, how would I want to manage this? How do I want to get feedback? And is this a problem in terms of design by committee? Like, how am I going to really look at all this feedback and know what to listen to and what to ignore? Like, there's that whole angle, and then there's just the playing games angle, and like, what do I enjoy, and am I enjoying playing this game early? Do I want the sneak peek? Like, really, do I want the sneak peek? Or am I just doing it because I'm like, ooh, this is exciting, I can be here first? Like, is it as fun of an experience as it would be if I waited? Let's explore that a little bit. I am Chris, and this is Game, Develop, Repeat. Let's start by talking about Soulframe. I actually have a lot to say about this game, which is interesting because I've not yet given them any feedback. And I want to explore that in a second. But first, let me give you a little rundown on a couple things from this because I've got the early access. We should talk about it a little bit, right? This game is beautiful. It's got this Gaelic folklore inspiration that I absolutely love. It's got this like whole forest focus. It feels like it's very rooted in nature. It seems to be the case that your character is going to be in alignment with the natural world to some extent, helping them out, defending nature. And I like this. I want games like that to exist because I enjoy them. I find it comforting, I find it peaceful, and I find it exciting. Maybe it's something about my personality, maybe it's something about growing up around some wilderness and liking going hiking and all of this stuff. It's not like a environmental kick, I don't think. It's just that I just enjoy it. I just go, oh my God, I get to spend some time in nature in a video game. These are my two favorite things, the natural world and the most artificial world possible, oddly enough. Now, I have a bunch of negative feedback on this game too, of course, right? It's in alpha. There's a ton of stuff, right? There's so many things that I could cover. There's miscellaneous things like the way that the doors are sort of labeled, if you catch my drift. Like some doors are able to be opened and some are not, and the distinction is not that clear. There's that sort of thing, right? The combat feels like it's trying to be sort of Souls-like while not quite being there, which is very different from Warframe, and it seems like they're trying to walk this tightrope between like Warframe and Elden Ring or like Dark Souls, and I just don't know if that's possible. There's something about the combat that feels a little bit off. And I have some other feedback too, right? But we're not going to keep digging into this right here. I just want to make the point that I somehow haven't provided this feedback to them. Why is that? Because there hasn't been a place where I go, oh, let me just click that button real quick, and then there's the feedback. Maybe that's in the game, but I haven't seen it. There have been multiple times where I go, oh, I would love to give them feedback about this specific problem that I'm encountering right now, but there's no button on the screen for me to hit to send feedback, and I don't want to alt tab and look up how to send them feedback, and I don't want to like go into another menu. And then I'll go, okay, well, I'll just keep exploring the game and I'll give them feedback later. And then I keep exploring the game. And then at the end of it, I'm like, okay, well, I'm done exploring the game for tonight. I don't really want to like, oh, what was that first bit of feedback I wanted to send them? I don't really know. What was the other? Man, I don't really remember. Whatever. I'm just going to bed. The fact of the matter is, giving feedback on the game is one of the lowest priorities in my life, right? Because of course, you've got all this other stuff going on. It's not that important to you, really, on the grand scale of things. You're excited about it. You want to contribute. But if at the end of the game session, you have a bunch of ideas for how to give feedback and it's not just like, boom, done, then you're just not going to do it, you know? Unless you're like really, really invested, you're not going to, I mean, maybe. I tried to get myself to do it. I thought about it a couple different ways. I was like, maybe if I frame it, I wanted to give them feedback, and I just was like, maybe I'll do it later, and I didn't. Maybe I'll do it later, and then I didn't. Now they don't have that feedback, and I'm wondering how many players are having the same experience. The other element of giving feedback, which is a huge point of resistance for this kind of thing, is that you don't know if your feedback is going to be welcome, so you kind of go, I don't want to be a nuisance. And of course the feedback is welcome. They're asking for it, but maybe your feedback is something they've heard a million times before and they read it and they just go, oh, this again, right? Maybe your feedback is something that they've never thought of, though, right? Maybe 100 other people are sending the exact same thing and you go, everybody else is sending it, or that typo is so obvious. So many people have caught that for sure. By the way, not always the case. Sometimes you catch a typo, you're the first person to catch it, and you should just go fix it, right? If it's like an open source project or whatever. The point that I'm trying to make is like every step along the way, there are barriers to sending feedback in general, not in this game specifically, in general. Sending feedback is uncomfortable, even for a know-it-all like me, even for somebody who's like, hey, I'm just making a podcast talking about games. I have a background in education. My whole thing is giving feedback. I love doing it. If somebody shows me their game, I'm immediately like, ooh, what can how could we improve this? What can we do about this? How is this? How does this feel to me? Is this just because it's not for me, or is this because it's a problem in the game's design? What about this other thing, right? Instantly, I want to dive in on all of this kind of stuff. Same thing with music. People showed me their music on stream the other day, and I was like, oh, let's go, right? Because, of course, my background's music education. So somebody shows me their music, I'm going to be like, okay, let's nitpick the ever-living crap out of this, but, like, coming from a loving place. It's always coming from a place of, like, I like this. Here's a little thing you could improve. I like this, right? The old hamburger method, which is genuinely, by the way, let's just throw this out for everybody who's ever giving feedback on creative work. That is a technique that they teach you in school when you are becoming a teacher. Positive, negative, positive. And the negative needs to be constructive because negative feedback hits really, really hard. So if you are giving somebody feedback, if you can, give them a specific, genuine, positive piece of feedback. Specific. That's so important. Then the negative feedback framed in a way that is just like, hey, here's a thing that you could improve, and this is my opinion on it, followed by another positive bit of feedback. Once again, if you can, specific. Don't just say, that was good, this part about it was a problem and I didn't enjoy it, but generally I enjoyed it. That is not how this works. Say something like, I really admired the way that you did this particular element. I thought that was engaging. You could improve on this because I thought that this was a little bit confusing. Also, I love the visuals that you have going on, right? Like, get specific with it. Get as specific as you can, because specific positives are useful too. Okay, that was Chris's music education tangent, education in general tangent. But how do I make sure that I give feedback to this game? Well, I don't know. I'm not going to. That's not my job. It's their job to make sure that I give feedback, oddly enough. It kind of is. I don't know. That seems harsh. That's like a weird, it's like a weird lukewarm take, but like it's the developer's job to make sure that the person in the like closed beta or in whatever is incentivized to give feedback, is interested in giving feedback, is engaged enough that giving feedback is like kind of fun or at least quick. And the best example of this that I can think of is Subnautica. I can also think of an example from our community. Blue Light Forge did a great little closed beta session. I say little because it was a weekend. It was just like, or no, there was like a day in the weekend where we were all participating in it, but it was longer than that. It was like maybe a week. Limited time, jump in there, rewards for giving feedback, that sort of a thing. Fantastic. We all got in on a Discord. We had a nice community bonding thing. We all just hung out, played the game, had a good time, gave feedback. Marvelous. Now, the best thing that I can think of for like a widely successful game that has already come out is Subnautica. Subnautica crushed it with feedback. I mean, just annihilated the way that they did this. You can find a breakdown of this on YouTube. I forget which channel it was from. It's probably Game Maker's Toolkit, GMTK. Could be, excuse me, I'm sorry, I have something stuck in my throat right now. Could be Adam Miller. Is that what it is? Adam Miller, Architect of Games. You know what? Let me just find it real quick. I'll be right back. Okay, the video in question is called Why Subnautica Owes its success to this button, and it is by People Make Games. It is a 15-minute video, 15:43. Why Subnautica owes its success to this button, People Make Games, and it is the feedback button. You can hit F8 at any time. Boom, feedback. You can give very effective feedback with like a nice rating meter, and they like map the data. I highly recommend watching that video. It was a very satisfying way to interact with feedback in this game. And I think they even kept it after full release, because I didn't play that game until full release, and I loved it, by the way. This game was so beautifully polished. They really took the feedback that people gave them and implemented it, because they could create a map of where in the game they were getting feedback from. So they could get like red frowny faces, they could get bug feedback. They had really like engaging ways to provide specific feedback that they could then process on their side. Just like tons of data. Beautiful. Wonderful. Such a good way of inviting your players to give you feedback. If there's a quick, easy way to just go, boom, feedback, done, don't have to leave the game. It's embedded within the entire experience that you were having. My God, incredible. What about other early access games? Let's just touch on this really quickly, because I'm going way too long in this first chunk. We got to mention Hades, because it's an early access, massive success story. This is a game where you paid for it, right? And it already delivered. You paid for it, it was in early access, and it was like, I'm getting a full game's worth of quality here. This is not like early access, this game is bad, right? This is like early access, this game is already sick. And then when it got full release, you're like, oh my God, it only gets better. One of the few cases of the early access version of the game not spoiling the full experience for you. You know what I mean? I think that's a problem we run into a lot with early access. You play the early access version, and then the full experience gets spoiled to some extent. It gets to this place where like it gets a full release, and you're like, oh, I guess I need to start a new save file, and I don't want to replay all that stuff. I don't know. I guess I'm done. And then you just never really come back around to the game. Hades, I don't think really had that problem, partially because it's a roguelike, right? Like, there's a lot of reasons why it wouldn't have that problem. You're expected to just keep doing run after run after run after run. It's just part of the game. So you're good there. But then you take a game that's much more like narrative or something, and I feel like that is a problem. I'm really glad I didn't play Subnautica in early access because I feel like it would have spoiled a lot of the experience for me. And I could be wrong, but in my experience, generally for me, for the way I work, if I play a game in early access and it's kind of like a long, like a one-shot experience, like you go through an entire save file and get to the end, like, it doesn't really work for me that often. Usually I end up just never completing the game. I kind of do that first run through, get to the point and go, oh, okay, well, all right, whatever. And then whenever they patch it, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to play it all again. Some gamers are going to be like, what are you talking about? I love that. I get to see how it evolves. I get to go through it. I get to add like extra content. I get to do multiple playthroughs and digest it differently on every playthrough. Great. It just, for some reason, it doesn't land for me. I don't know. And then you've got two other things that we have to mention. One, Star Citizen. Actually, I don't even know. We're not even going to go in on that. But Project Zomboid. Here's one that we need to mention is Project Zomboid. This game has been in early access for so incredibly long. And this is a thing that happens sometimes, right? The scope of early access is notorious for going crazy, right? There are so many cases of an early access game that just becomes a never-ending project. And I don't even think this is a case of Project Zomboid's scope expanding. I think this is like they had some bad luck. They have had more trouble completing things than they thought they would. There's a lot of things that have gone on, but the fact of the matter is that game has been in early access for way too long. It's been like that forever, right? It's a lot, you know? I think there's a lot of promises that they got to make, and props to them for continuing to work towards it and so on and so on, but like this is one of the pitfalls that some of these games are running into, and that's scary. And I think this is why when I see that a game's in early access, I just don't buy it. I literally just don't purchase it. If it's a paid game in early access, I just go, okay, well, I can wait. Let me know when it's done. I can wait. It's fine. Because I've been burned one too many times, and I think a lot of people are that way too. But I think that doesn't have to always be the case. Because you look at a game like Hades, and it didn't get spoiled by it. And it, if anything, it just improved the game. And if you want to be involved in the development of the game, then the early access thing is phenomenal. If you get excited about giving feedback, then it's incredible. And it's like this cool, unique opportunity to watch a game grow and to get a little bit more understanding of the development process along the way. But I do think there's a lot of like, I'm going to make my game early access just so I can fund it. And I'm like, all right, okay, yes. And does your game fit in with an early access model? Which I'm now in the moment as we're talking about this. I'm thinking about that more than I ever have before. Because I didn't recognize the design differences between a game like Hades and all of these other early access games that I'm thinking about. Or a game like Darkest Dungeon, which is, in my opinion, a great fit for an early access thing. Right? Like I played that in early access and in full release, which is rare for me. These are pretty good angles on it. Now, the last bit that I'll mention in this section is paid early access games and free early access games. I love a free early access situation. If it's an MMO kind of game, if it's something that's huge in multiplayer and online, it makes perfect sense to me. I know that it's not like, you know, it's not like apples to apples comparison here. These are very different things. Like a Steam game that you're picking up for $20 that's early access versus like an open beta or something like Soulframe that we were talking about earlier with an alpha that you get a code for. But I love the idea of doing like rolling access into this game that's going to ultimately be a free MMO with like some subscription features or what have you. I love the idea of just slowly inviting people into it, building up that server load, getting feedback from the players, like figuring out how much demand there is. That makes perfect sense to me. I don't know that much about MMO development, by which I mean I know basically nothing. But that seems like it's just like there's a reason so many of them are doing it. I don't think that ever gets backlash. I think it just makes sense. I think you avoid this like giant server drop day one thing. I mean, I guess there's backlash on like expansion content, early access stuff. I don't like that necessarily, but I see the benefits. Anyway, let's delve into the developer side of this and theorize about the best ways to get feedback from players before you release the game. With so many different ways to collect player feedback, what is the best way for you or for me to get feedback on our particular project? My guess is that for most of the listeners to this podcast, the best way is going to be a closed playtest, not even like a full beta, the sort of thing that Blue Light Forge did. This small kind of community-driven effort to get feedback, get some people on a Discord, get some people on a call, maybe do a couple individual tests with people you know before you do this, right? Get your game as far along as you can. Really feel like, okay, I know what this is. This feels pretty polished. This feels good to me. Let's see what this friend thinks. Have them play it. See what they say. Okay, great. Feedback done. Do another one with another friend. Okay, great. Feedback done. Do a big group session once you've gotten all of that done. Maybe do a little launch on Steam for a closed test that you can opt into, which is what Blue Light did. Blue Light Forge, excuse me. You can use all of these tools at your disposal, and you can, of course, always do something on itch, give people passwords, so on and so on. But there are ways to just have a nice kind of community night with it and collect all this feedback and use bots to collect certain information and what have you, and do things through Discord. You don't necessarily have to have something embedded in your game. But I think the next step up is having kind of a public feedback option for a open beta test, right? Something where people can give you direct feedback via an in-game feature, right? Like a button in the game, something that says, hey, give feedback, and then it automatically sends the feedback to you in a specific format for you to deal with. I think that is like, for a longer term test, that is so nice. Now that might be hard to implement. I think it would be worthwhile too, but like that's a major thing. And you may not want that. That's the other angle, is maybe your particular design philosophy or maybe your personality is like, I don't really want that. I want to follow my own specific vision for this game, and like I want to know about bugs, yes, but I don't really want that much in the way of like design feedback. So maybe you have to design it in a very specific way. Maybe you just get it to where it's like, give me how you're feeling about this part of the game, right? How is it having an impact on you? But don't tell me what you think I should do. And you wouldn't phrase it like that because that's kind of aggressive. It comes off negatively, but you could create an interface that instills a sense of, this is the kind of information I would like, whether or not people will follow it, whatever, but you can kind of design questions so that you're more likely to get the kind of feedback that you're looking for, right? And I think that's something across the board. You can design your questions to affect the feedback, which is great and terrible. You can bias all of your feedback heavily. You can focus on the wrong things. You can lock in on the wrong details. It can be awful. Now let's talk about paid early access on the developer side of things. I have maybe a spicy take. I don't think it's that hot at this point. I think most people probably agree with me on this, but the other day I thought that most people probably agreed that Sbarro's pizza was delicious, and Twitch stream revolted on me on that. Everybody was like, "No, that's disgusting. What's wrong with you?" It was rough. I don't know. I thought people liked it. I like it. Anyway, here's my spicy take. Sorry to get on a tangent. The idea of releasing your game as early access, if you are a small solo developer, if you have a small following, if you've got a couple hundred wish lists even, which is pretty decent, I don't think that should be early access. My mindset on the early access thing is like, if there's like a big old following and you're really far along and you just you have a huge vision and you want to keep building on that vision, sure, get after it. But early access to me is not like, hey, everybody fund my project. I don't want to view it the way that people view Kickstarter and stuff. I kind of view it as hey, here is the initial version of this game. It's only getting better from here, right? And then there's this thing that's happened where the game it never stops being early access. And I'm talking about released games that just get patches and content for the rest of their days, which is really cool if the developer can afford to do that. But I do think that it's a weird side effect of the early access culture, is that people expect a game's development to never be done. Maybe it's not from that. Maybe it's something that's always existed. I can't say for sure, but it is interesting, isn't it? It is an odd little connection. Let me see if I have any notes about something else okay, I've got two more things I want to mention before we close it out. One, it's possible to get overwhelmed by the amount of feedback, and I think that's worth keeping in mind. So I talked about ways to get more feedback, right? Making sure that there's an extremely easily accessible method for sending feedback. But also, you might be getting too much feedback of the same type. You might there might be feedback that you just need to ignore. And the last point that I want to make is that the player is not always right, right? The person who does not have any background or reference or anything in what you're working on, and doesn't understand how the programming language works, and doesn't understand the engine, and doesn't understand the requirements and how the game design is structured, and how if you change this one feature it'll change everything else. They may give you some specific recommendations, oh, it would be so cool if you did this, and it's out of pocket immediately you might look at that and go, that's not gonna work. We're not doing that. Player isn't always right. They can just be dead wrong. Absolutely, completely, and totally dead wrong. But there's still value in listening to what they're asking for. Because ultimately they're giving you information. They're asking for something interesting. And it's worth hearing them out, even if they're telling you to turn your idle game into a third-person MMO. There's something there, and you can get to the root of it and be oh, they want a little bit more action. They want it to be a little bit more engaging, right? Or they're oh, they want some kind of visual thing going on that's just a little bit more exciting and flashy. And there's some kind of value you can draw, even when the feedback is not that useful. Is it worth taking the time to draw that value out? Well, that's another question. Maybe sometimes you just got to ditch the feedback entirely. But only occasionally, right? I've got a somewhat open question for you this week, and that is, what is the role of feedback in your development process? Do you even want it to play a major role? Because I don't think that's a given. I think it's completely fine if you want to get basically no feedback on your game design in terms of gameplay loop and feel and genre and presentation and all of these things, I think probably you want to get some feedback on like UI and hotkey rebinding and accessibility and these things. But there's a place for just going, no, screw what anybody thinks. I am creating a piece of art about my perspective, and I don't care if you think that the protagonist should be taller. I don't care if you think that I should use this color scheme instead of that color scheme. I'm not interested in hearing your opinion on the setting of the world, or that it's too dark, or that it's too gritty, or that it's too bright and too cheerful. This is my game, this is my piece of art, and this is what I'm making. So deal with it, and if you like it, you do. If you don't, you don't. I think there is an enormous amount of value in that. So I wonder where the balance is. How much feedback do you want to take? And in what categories do you want to take that feedback? Because I think generally user interface feedback is probably going to be pretty valuable. There might be some cases where it's like, that messes with the design. That messes with the design a lot. So actually we're not going to do that, right? Like if you've really thought through it. But I don't think we need to listen to all the feedback. We're creating a piece of art here, you know? Not to get like too in the weeds with it, but you're presenting your perspective. You're creating something and sharing it with the world, and that creation needs to reflect you and your experiences. It does not have to reflect what everybody else's experiences are. They can make their own thing and express their experiences. That's part of my angle here. But the question I had asked, one more time. The question I had asked is, what is the role of feedback in your development process? Give it a think, and then stop by the Discord, stop by the Twitch, have a chat with us, hang out, all that good stuff. There's links to the Discord invite in the description, and then the Twitch and all of this stuff. It's Anxious Buddha Games, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 2 p.m. Eastern. That is everything that I have for you this week. Next week is episode 100. We will be at episode 100, which is insane to me. Thank you guys for listening, especially if you've been listening this whole freaking time. That's crazy. Thank you. And I'll see you next week for the 100th episode. Till then, get out there, make some stuff, have fun with it. Bye-bye.